There's something uniquely cruel about being humiliated in a room full of people who once knew the sound of your childhood laughter. Sorry, this table's for family only. Her voice cut through the holiday noise like a cold knife. It wasn't shouted, but it didn't have to be. Just loud enough, just sharp enough to carry across the dining room. The kind of sentence that makes the laughter die in someone's throat. That makes forks freeze midair. She didn't even look at me when she said it. Just rearranged her napkin like she hadn't gutted someone with 6 words. I was still standing there, holding the pie I'd baked at 6 a.m. that morning, the one that Mom used to call my signature. I'd even used her old ceramic dish, the one with the little crack on the rim she said looked like a smile. It had always made it to the center of the Thanksgiving table. But not this year. Not with Ashley at the helm. Ashley, my father's new wife's daughter. Technically my stepsister. But not really. Not when she made sure I knew I didn't count. I looked across the long mahogany table. Everyone was already seated. My father, looking older than I remembered, carving the turkey like he was concentrating on a delicate surgery. My brother with his wife and kids. A few cousins I hadn't seen in years. All faces I knew. And yet none of them met my eyes. No one said a word. Not even Dad. The silence was worse than the sentence. I should have said something. Should have forced a laugh. Made a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. That small, brittle kind of smile you perfect after years of knowing when you're not wanted, but staying anyway, because deep down, you keep hoping someone will change their mind. No worries, I said. My voice came out airy, like I was agreeing with a hostess at a restaurant, not being exiled from my own family's holiday table. And I walked away, not fast, not slow, just out of place. I set the pie down on the sideboard like it was some offering. Then I found a folding chair near the back, next to the sliding doors, just out of view of the fireplace and the laughter. They didn't miss me. No one asked me to come back. Even the pie stayed untouched. Outside, dusk had already begun to settle. The sky was that soft November gray, like everything was holding its breath before winter took over. I could see my reflection in the glass, one woman, alone in a house she used to call home. And then I heard it, a small voice behind me. "Why aren't you sitting with us?" I turned. Emma, my brother's youngest. 10 years old, still clutching a roll and looking up at me like I'd just broken a rule in a game she didn't understand. I hesitated, then said, "They said the table's for family." Her brows scrunched. "But you are family." It wasn't the words that undid me. It was the innocence in them, the way she looked at me without politics or pecking orders, like I hadn't just been erased in plain sight. "Thank you, sweetheart," I murmured. And for the first time that evening, my smile felt real, but something else bloomed beneath it. Not sadness, resolve. Because when even your own blood lets a stranger decide your place in the family, maybe it's time you remind them exactly who you are, or better yet, make them wish they hadn't forgotten. The thing about family is, you never really see the cracks until you're the one bleeding through them. When Emma asked why I wasn't sitting at the table, I smiled, but inside, it stirred something I hadn't let rise in years. Memories don't always come back in order. They hit like flashes, some sharp, some soft, staining the present before you even realize you're back there. Like when I was 13 and Dad came home late again. Mom was already deep in one of her migraines. I remember standing on a step stool, carefully stirring a pot of soup I'd made from whatever we had left in the pantry. Ashley was curled up on the couch with a blanket, flipping through magazines while I worried whether there'd be enough left for tomorrow's lunch. She didn't lift a finger. And back then, I didn't expect her to. She was the guest. The child of Dad's second marriage. Still adjusting, everyone said. I was the one who adjusted, again and again. Quietly. When Mom passed 2 years later, it was like a silence moved into the house and made itself comfortable. Dad didn't take it well. He buried himself in work. Ashley got a therapist. I got a list of chores and a thanks kid when I picked up her allergy meds. By the time I was 20, I had a full-time job, was putting myself through night classes, and still showing up every Thursday to pick up Dad's blood pressure pills. When he had his first heart scare, I was the one who slept on a cot next to his hospital bed. Ashley flew in for a day, took photos for Facebook, and left with a bouquet from the gift shop. She was tagged in 13 comments as his rock. I didn't say a word, even when she moved into the guest house without paying rent, just until I get on my feet, she said. I brought her groceries. When she forgot to pick Dad up from a follow-up appointment, I left work early and didn't bill the hours. I didn't ask for gas money. I didn't even tell her I'd done it. And when Dad decided to refinance the house to help Ashley start her boutique, "She's trying, honey, and you're so stable already." I was the one who co-signed the loan. My name went on the paperwork, my credit, my stability, but no one ever said thank you. Not Dad, not Ashley. I wasn't angry back then. Not really. I told myself it was love, family, that this was what loyalty looked like. Even when I put my own dream job on hold to stay close, declined a transfer offer from the publishing firm that would have taken me to Chicago, a life I'd quietly built in my head, one I never told anyone about, I told myself it was worth it. Because one day, maybe, they'd see, but they didn't. Ashley's store flopped after 2 years. She sold overpriced candles and vegan scarves in a town that didn't care. Dad bailed her out twice. I was the one who managed his paperwork, cut his checks, handled the phone calls. I kept things afloat with numbers, grace, and grit. Still, during dinners, Dad would say, "Ashley's had a rough time, but she's really trying." Then he'd turn to me, smile, and say, "And thank God for the dependable ones." I used to laugh at that, quietly. But dependable sounds a lot like invisible when you say it enough times. The worst part, I never pushed back, never asked for credit, never made a scene. I just kept showing up. Even the house we sat in that Thanksgiving, it was in my name. Dad didn't qualify for the second mortgage loan. I'd stepped in years ago. Just paperwork, just for convenience, just until things were more stable. I never pushed to change it. Never thought to. Because in my heart, I was family. I belonged. But that day, sitting by the glass door with Emma's voice still echoing in my head, I realized I had been raised to believe that my value only existed if I kept giving. And I'd done that. Over and over again. I'd given them time, credit, labor, patience. I even gave them silence, especially silence, because when Ashley started calling herself Dad's real caregiver, I didn't correct her. When she invited friends over and gave them tours of our home, I bit my tongue. When she started helping herself to Dad's account and said, "Don't worry, he told me it's fine," I didn't ask for receipts. But something about the way she said it, "This table's for family only," hit different. It wasn't just cold. It was scripted, planned, and the way no one flinched told me they'd all heard it before, maybe even agreed. That's when I understood. I wasn't part of this family because I was useful. I was only useful because I never made them feel uncomfortable. I never reminded them what they owed, never asked them to see what it cost me to stay small so they could feel big. But Emma did. That little girl, with one simple question, reminded me what I'd forgotten. I am family. I've always been family. They were just too comfortable pretending otherwise. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped making it so easy for them to forget. It started with a knock on my door. 3 days after Thanksgiving. I was still nursing the hollow space left in my chest when Emma's question, "But you are family," rattled something I hadn't dared to examine. And then came the knock. Ashley, in heels, with a folder in one hand and her usual peppermint-laced perfume clouding the air like it was meant to distract. She didn't waste time. "Dad wants to sign the house over to me," she said, smiling with lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It'll be easier for tax reasons. You're on the deed, so we just need your signature here." She held out a pen like it was a baton I'd been passed 1,000 times. I stared at her, silent. She didn't flinch. She thought I'd just do it, like I always had. Like when I'd taken the night shift, so she could sleep through Mom's hospital days. Like when I'd skipped my own graduation ceremony to pick up Dad's prescriptions. Like when I'd co-signed a loan so she could open her candle boutique that folded in under 2 years. I took the folder and flipped it open. The paperwork was all there. her name neatly typed in black ink. Mine. Just a signature away from being erased. "Why now?" I asked, voice low. She shrugged. "We're thinking of selling. The market's good, and Dad might move in with me eventually." I looked up. Her tone was casual, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "You're selling my house?" I said, soft but clear. She gave a short laugh. "Well, it's Dad's house, technically. He's always said that." But he hadn't. It was me who made the mortgage payments when things fell behind. Me who paid the property taxes last year when Ashley maxed out Dad's card on accident. Me who signed the dotted line when the refinancing went through because Dad's credit had tanked after his second hospital stay. And now they were just taking it. I didn't say anything else. I closed the folder, handed it back, and stepped aside. Ashley looked almost confused. "So, is that a no?" I smiled. "It's a not today." She left without another word. I didn't sleep that night, because something inside me had shifted, quietly but fully. They were going to sell the house. They were going to cut me out, not just from the table, but from everything. The past, the sacrifices, the home I held together with hands no one ever noticed until they needed something. And I realized they were done pretending. So maybe it was time I was done being silent. 2 weeks later, Dad called a family meeting. That's what he called it. A little gathering before the holidays hit full swing. Said it was about financial clarity. I arrived early, sat on the same living room couch I'd once cried on the night Mom died. The same room where Ashley first moved in, where I'd baked birthday cakes and bandaged scraped knees and kept this entire family glued together. Ashley arrived with her laptop. My brother brought wine. A cousin or two showed up. No one looked surprised to see me. They probably thought I was still playing the same old role. Dad sat at the head of the table. Gray. Thinner than last year. A man too tired to notice the damage done in his name. "Thanks for coming," he said, tapping a spoon on his mug. "There's some changes we're making with the house. Ashley will explain." Ashley stood, all poised and glossy. She opened a slideshow. "As you know, Dad's health has made us rethink a few things. We've decided to sell the house and move him into a more manageable living space. Closer to me, of course." Of course. She clicked to the next slide. Charts, numbers, buzzwords like streamlining and liquidity. Someone clapped. Probably Cousin Mark. Then Ashley said, "We'll need to remove Michelle's name from the deed so we can proceed cleanly with the sale." Silence. Then she smiled at me. "Of course, we assumed you'd be on board." Everyone looked at me, even Dad. And I stood, slowly. "Actually," I said, my voice calm, like I was setting a pie on the counter, "there's something I should share before anyone makes assumptions." I pulled out my phone, opened a file, cast it to the TV with one click. It was a scanned copy of the refinancing agreement, the one signed years ago when the house was almost lost. And beneath Dad's signature, mine. Then came the next page, an addendum, quietly drawn up, notarized. Ashley never saw it, but it had always been there. It stated that until the loan was repaid in full, the property title would remain in my name. As collateral, because I was the one who saved it. Gasps broke out like popcorn. Ashley froze. Dad blinked. "You never told me you added that." "No," I said. "I didn't, but it's legal and binding." Ashley stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" I turned to her. "I can, and I will. You tried to sell my home. You tried to erase me, Ashley, but I'm not invisible anymore." The room went silent. No one clapped this time. Even the slideshow stopped flicking. And Dad, finally, looked at me. Really looked at me, like he saw something for the first time. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there, steady, letting the truth fill the space they'd tried so hard to keep me out of. They wanted to write me out. But I had the pen. The room didn't move. Ashley's manicured fingers were still hovering mid-air, as if her next slide might still save her. Dad was blinking rapidly, as though the act of squinting could erase what he'd just seen on screen. My brother looked down at his wine glass, suddenly deeply invested in a smudge on the rim. And the cousins, they stayed quiet. Everyone did. I stood alone. But for the first time in that house, I didn't feel outnumbered. I think, I said slowly, somewhere along the way, everyone forgot how this house was saved. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The facts were louder than anything I could have yelled. Ashley, I continued, looking her straight in the eyes, when your boutique failed, Dad didn't have the money. I stepped in, you knew it, and you signed the thank you card that came with the flowers. Do you remember that? She said nothing. That refinance? The one that kept the lights on? The one that let Dad keep his medical appointments without collectors breathing down our necks? Still nothing. Her jaw was tight, her knuckles bone white. I didn't need to be on the title, but Dad asked. He begged, because no bank would trust him alone, and because I had never said no to this family. Only now. I had. And that silence, the kind that once swallowed me whole, was mine to command now. I don't need applause. I don't need gratitude. But I will not be erased. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe he didn't know how deep it had all run. But that was the thing about years of silent sacrifice. You don't always see the slow burial until someone shows you the grave. Ashley broke first. This is manipulation, she spat. You're just mad about the table. I looked at her. No, I'm mad that I let you all decide I didn't belong at it. And then I reached into my bag and pulled out the final card I'd never intended to play. Until now. I wasn't going to do this, I said, unfolding the crisp envelope. But I think it's time we stop pretending who's really been keeping this family upright. I passed the envelope to Dad. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside were copies of every payment I'd made for the house, mortgage receipts, property tax records, utility bills. The hospital invoice I paid outright when Dad's insurance lapsed. All of it, dated, signed, tracked, bound together with a notarized letter from the bank confirming that my name, and only mine, had fulfilled the terms of the refinance. Ashley lunged for the folder. Dad pulled it away. There was something about seeing it all in one place, black and white, that finally cracked the image they'd been clinging to. The lie that this home was theirs by right. That I'd always just been around, useful but forgettable. It hit differently when it came with legal paper. This house, I said, steady as stone, is mine, not out of spite, not because I wanted it, but because when it needed to be saved, I showed up. Ashley's mouth opened again, but this time her voice cracked. Dad! But he didn't look at her. He was still holding the envelope like it weighed 1,000 pounds, like he couldn't believe what he was reading. Or maybe, like he could. My brother finally cleared his throat. Michelle, why didn't you tell us? I turned to him. Would it have changed anything? And the look on his face told me what I already knew. No, it wouldn't, because no one wanted to see me. Not really. Not when it was easier to believe I was just nice, just quiet, just available. Until I said no. Until I made myself visible. Ashley sat down, or more like collapsed into the nearest chair. The slideshow still glowed behind her, halfway through a transition about streamlining assets, now completely irrelevant. Dad set the folder on the table. He looked at me like a man who had been asked to reread his own obituary and had only just realized the name at the top. I didn't know, he said, voice hoarse. I believe you, I replied. But she did. Ashley flinched, and that's when Emma walked in. She must have heard the tail end. She was standing in the hallway, wearing her holiday sweater, holding a gingerbread cookie, and staring wide-eyed at the grown-ups. She looked from Ashley to me. Are you okay? I crouched a little to her height. I'm better now. She nodded, then reached into her tiny purse and pulled something out. One of those little construction paper name tags kids make in school. She handed it to me. It said, Michelle, family. I nearly broke right there. I hugged her instead. And when I stood up again, I looked around the room and let the quiet settle. I'm not asking anyone to clap. I'm not asking for praise. But from this point forward, I write my own role in this family. And with that, I walked out of the room. Slow, calm, unshaken. No shouting, no slamming doors. But the twist had landed like thunder anyway, because for the first time in their lives, they saw the woman they'd buried under responsibility rise. And none of them knew what to do with her now. After that night, the house got quieter. Not just in volume, something deeper, like the energy shifted. Like the walls themselves had finally stopped holding their breath. No one mentioned the slideshow again. Ashley didn't show up the next weekend, even though she was supposed to help Dad decorate for Christmas. She texted him once. He didn't respond. I didn't gloat. I didn't send follow-ups. I just waited. And things began to unravel on their own. First came the bank. Dad got a call about a separate account he hadn't remembered opening. One with his name and Ashley's. Joint, apparently. It had been drained 2 months prior, nearly $8,000. When the rep emailed him the access logs, the IP address traced back to Ashley's boutique's old office. She had tried to cover it, said it was authorized, said he must have forgotten, but the date matched a weekend he was in the ICU. Then came the legal letter. I never planned to press charges, but the bank did. And once they started digging, they found more. Cash withdrawals from his retirement fund. Little ones spaced out, but enough to raise flags. Charges to luxury retailers that Dad had never even heard of. One trip to Napa Valley listed under caregiving travel. Ashley stopped answering calls. My brother tried to step in, said we should all sit down and talk this through like family. But by then, the word family had lost its shine. I told him flatly, I tried that. You were all at the table. He went quiet. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. The consequences didn't come all at once. They came slow, like a drip. But each drop landed exactly where it needed to. Ashley was subpoenaed for financial records. She cried on Facebook, said she was being attacked by people who didn't understand how hard she'd worked. But the truth came out, and it came with screenshots. Emma's mom, my sister-in-law, sent me a private message. I'm so sorry, it read. I knew she was always dramatic. I didn't realize she was this. I didn't respond. Not to be rude, but because I didn't need her guilt. What I needed, I already had. The silence. The shift. Dad stepped down from the family group chat a week later, said he needed time to reflect, but then he called me. I don't know how to fix this, he said, voice low. You don't have to, I replied. You just have to stop letting it happen. We didn't talk long, but I could hear something in his tone, shame maybe, or loss, or that odd realization that the person he'd always relied on had quietly stopped carrying his weight. Ashley had always been loud enough to make people forget who was really holding things together. But not anymore. I removed her from the deed officially in January. No one contested it. The lawyer called it remarkably smooth. Her name vanished from the paperwork like it had never belonged. And yet, she never apologized. Not once. Not even when her friends began pulling away. When people she once invited to our family gatherings quietly unfollowed. When her name came up in whispers, followed by a pause. Then, wait, is that the one who... Yeah, that one. By February, she moved to Arizona, said she needed a fresh start. I didn't send a goodbye. Dad tried to give me the house, sign it over completely. I declined. I don't need ownership, I told him. I already proved my part. Instead, I helped him set up a living trust, made sure Emma's name was on it, quietly, just in case. Not to exclude anyone, but to protect the only person at that table who had ever looked at me and said without condition, "Your family." That was enough. As for the others, my cousins kept their distance. My brother apologized once, haltingly. I let him. But we both knew things had changed. Not out of revenge, just clarity. Some people, once the truth is out, can't meet your eyes the same way again, and that's fine. I started spending Sundays at the community center downtown, reading to kids, planting flowers behind the church, fixing furniture for people who couldn't afford repairs. Small things. It helped, not to forget, but to live again, to step out from the role they'd written for me, caretaker, fixer, footnote, and into one I'd finally chosen for myself, not in anger, but in freedom. And every so often, I pass by that dining table, the one where it all started, still polished, still standing, but it doesn't own me anymore. The house is quiet now in the mornings, not the heavy silence of being ignored, not the aching kind that once lived in my bones after holiday dinners where I smiled too long and swallowed too much. No, this is a peaceful quiet, a full one, the kind you earn. Sometimes, I stand by the window with my coffee and just watch the sunlight move across the kitchen tile. That little crack near the stove, the one Ashley used to call ugly, catches the light in the same way it always has. Like a seam of gold no one ever bothered to polish. And now, I let it stay that way. Last week I painted the guest room, not because anyone was visiting, but because I wanted to. A deep moss green, rich, steady. I hung one of Mom's old framed prints in there, the one of the willow tree by the lake, the one everyone forgot was hers. It feels like she's here sometimes, not in a haunting way, in a gentle, watching way, like she sees the space I finally made for myself, and approves. Dad doesn't live with me, but he calls more. Not out of guilt, not anymore. We don't talk about the table, or the deed, or the hearing that never needed a judge because silence from him was all it took for Ashley to fall from grace. We talk about books, about how Emma's growing so fast it makes his heart ache, about his cholesterol and his attempts to finally learn how to cook rice without burning it. He still gets it wrong, but he's trying. Emma came over last Sunday with a bag of gingerbread cookies she'd made by herself. They're a little burnt, she warned me, setting them on the table. I took a bite. Perfect, I said, and meant it. She beamed. Then she pulled something out of her backpack, another paper name tag, laminated this time. So it lasts, she said, in case anyone ever forgets again. It still said, Michelle, family. I keep it pinned above my desk now. Funny how a single sentence spoken by a child can rebuild what a family tried to erase. I don't host big dinners, not yet, maybe not ever. But I did buy a new dining table. Smaller, warmer, round, not long. No head to the table, no end seat of power. And the first person I invited to sit at it was myself. It sounds small, but it's everything. Because when you've spent decades waiting for someone to make room for you, only to realize you've had a chair in your hand this whole time, you learn to stop knocking on doors that stay locked. You build your own space instead. One morning, as I was sweeping the porch, an older woman from up the block passed by. We'd never spoken much, but she stopped. I saw what you did, she said softly, almost shyly. At the family meeting. My niece works at the bank. I paused. She smiled. Good for you. Then she kept walking. It stunned me for a second, not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me how often women like me, like her, like you, carry the weight and say nothing. We show up, we patch holes, we absorb disrespect, and still bring the pie. And when we finally speak, when we finally say, no more, the world takes a breath. To anyone watching this, who's ever been told they don't belong at a table they helped build, you do. You always did. Sometimes you just have to pull up your own chair. Sometimes you have to walk away first to be seen at all. And sometimes, the biggest revenge isn't anger, it's freedom. If this story felt familiar, leave me a comment. If someone's ever made you feel small, forgotten, or used, say it out loud here. You're not alone. And if you know someone who needs this message today, share it with them. Quiet strength is still strength. And if no one's told you lately, you are more than what they needed from you. You are worth more than your silence. Don't wait to be invited. Choose yourself. And when you're ready, build the table.